let's talk about the additional tools that we're going to be using in this lesson. Like I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about just a little more tools, both from create and modify, and we're also going to be talking about insert options. So let's just talk about one by one, briefly getting into how exactly that instrument works. In create, one of the tools I haven't shown you is sweep. It's right here. Sweep works if you already have an existing sketch of a line or a spline, and then you need to have some sort of geometry that you will be sweeping across that line. And for the sake of illustration here, I'm going to be moving this in several dimensions basically, so it's not just flat, and the sweep will still work. So you can sweep primitives, so like cylinder, box, but you can also sweep kind of like sketches, other profiles. I'm just going to create a sketch in a different plane right here. The only thing is I want my profile that I'm sweeping to be intersecting or beginning or being close to the rail. The sketch lines and the curve lines are the rails. So I'm just gonna sketch something random, because you can just, the point is you can sweep any shape. So we're gonna extrude that. And we're going into sweep. This is going to be the profile. This is going to be the path. It's sweeping the profile along the path. It's a great way to create some curved details, not only wires and stuff like that and hoses, but just about any curved detail that's harder to achieve otherwise. The next thing I wanted to talk about is Loft. It's kind of close to sweeping. We're basically connecting two profiles together. So for this, I'm going to create a different primitive like this. And this is a profile. And this is a profile. And we can loft in between them. I'm actually going to hide the sketches so they're not in the way. So we're going to create a loft, profile number 1, profile number 2. It creates the loft. It will connect any amount of faces to any amount of faces, basically. What I mean by that is it's like more like edges. I can connect a cube to a cylinder. Here's a good example. I'm going to use it as a separate body. Move it out. And then I'm going to loft it. There you go. Of course, you can also play with some options. You can use guide rails for that, but we're not going to go into too much detail. I'm rarely using this, although it's a powerful tool if you know exactly what shape you're trying to achieve. The next tool is pipe, very similar to sweep, but we'll turn back on the sketches we have. The pipe is right here. The difference between sweep and pipe is pipe is already offering us to kind of do the sweep with a cylinder or a square or triangle. It's limited to just that. And it will do the pipe on both sketches and curves. the create form option right here, I just want you to know about it. We're gonna, if we need that in the process of creating the final assembly, we can resort to that. But generally, I would just recommend to explore this on your own, because sculpting environment, the create form takes you to the sculpting environment, is really different. It's closer to polygonal modeling, being constantly in sub-D mode, which you can switch in between. I'm just gonna give you a really quick demo. This is what it looks like. It looks like a box that's already been smoothed out, and you can always switch in terms of how you display it. Just kind of like in Maya, you can display it as a box or smooth, but normally you just work in smooth all the time. Some benefits to working in sculpt mode is you can just edit faces by dragging them out, so you can achieve shapes that are much more organic. As you can see, much more sculpted. And sometimes you just need stuff like this. Sometimes you just need shapes that look way more organic than what you can achieve in the modeling mode. This looks like a door handle or like the end of the glass frame, stuff like this. But like I said, I rarely use it, although I do use it. In this tutorial, we're not going to be talking about it much, so I just want you to be aware of the option. A lot of times, if you're working in sculpt mode, you will be working with just a surface, just like in polygonal modeling. Right now, this thing is closed, so it presents a closed volume. But if I delete a face by selecting and just pressing delete on the keyboard, this object becomes open, and now it's shallow. So if I finish form, it will take me back to modeling mode, and right now I'm looking at a basically single-sided face, single-sided model. So to give it some thickness, I'm going to use the thicken operation. That's the last operation in Create I'm going to be talking in this chapter about. All I really need to do is just right-click and thicken and give it some thickness one way, or like inside or outside. If your shape's getting way too complicated, and this will be a problem because of the self-intersecting faces and stuff like this. But again, not really talking about it. The reason we need thickness is because if we have those, so to speak, single-sided faces, single-sided models, we cannot do any modeling solid operations with them. So we need to give them some thickness, because just like I said in the previous chapter, it needs to be just like a piece of metal. It has to have real thickness, has to be solid. But once it's solid, we can start doing all of those Boolean operations with it, pretty much anything we want, cutting, whatever. It will become a solid body. And again, to convert that to solid body, you just click Finish Form. If your faces are not intersecting, if there are no problems, it will convert no problem. Next thing I want to talk about is the Modify section, so I'm just going to clean the design. In Modify, I just wanted to show you shelling and just explain what is delete versus remove do. The easiest example of shelling is we're going to go ahead and create a sphere, which I rarely create spheres here for some reason. And right now, you can think about the sphere as a solid ball of metal. So if we do a cross section of this sphere, we are going to do section analysis based on this plane. You can see that this is a cross section. I'm looking at this face is yellow, telling me that this sphere is not hollow, right? It's filled with material. So now I'm just going to leave it at this stage. And then the shell operation, which I have conveniently here, if I click on the body and give it the thickness, you can now see that I gave my model a thickness, but inside it's hollow. So this is the only part that's being a solid model here. And of course, just like with any parametric modeling, you can just type in 5 millimeters. This is going to be 5 millimeters at this size, or 1 millimeter. So that's all shelling is, but it is a powerful tool. And I'm going to try to explain why. If we have something more or less complicated, but still in a solid state, so I'm just going to make some cuts, some edits to this thing. Just basically an example of a complicated body, complicated surface that's not just a primitive. One side is going to be like this, and the other side, well, actually, let's make it even more interesting. Just gonna chamfer this edge. So now you see that this face is fairly complex, but we can still shell the whole object. So we're just gonna go to shell, and with the sphere, it only has one face, so there was no picking which face to start from. But here, if I pick this face to start from, this is going to be the thickness, and you can look inside of that object. Or I can start with this face. Starting with a curved face with shelling is a little tricky. Not always will it work, but Fusion will take some time to calculate it. And if it's able to calculate, if it's able to compute, it will. If not, it will just take a second and tell you that I wasn't able to calculate the inner volume at the required thickness. So right now it's telling me no. Like the thickness that I picked, 15 millimeters, is definitely not working. So now that you know this, I can show you the difference between deleting and removing. Deleting is a fairly straightforward thing. Everything here is I like to call it features. So this chamfer, the fillet, was a feature that I added to the edge. The chamfer was a feature that I added to the edge. And then this whole thing is a body. And in the design history, which we will talk about later in this chapter, in this lesson, in the design history, they are represented here by these little icons. So this is the full chamfer. This is a fillet right here. This is another fillet. And when we say delete, it deletes the feature. And then I can delete the whole chamfer. You can see it influences. The yellow is what it has influenced because we kind of went back in time and deleted it, but we'll talk about it. I'll delete this as well. So now it's back to this form. But if you want to remove the whole body, right here, we'll right click and say remove. Just trust me, it's much easier than doing delete, because it will completely cut out the whole body out of this timeline, just like that. If I go back, if I say delete, it will still do that, but you can see that it's still trying to reference the rest of the operations that were happening. So if you're deleting a body in the middle of modeling, it is going to go through the whole timeline and try to calculate it, which is definitely not the best way to go about it. So we're just going to stick to removing, and you can think about removing as surgically cutting this out without influencing anything else.